Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Brown Bag Lunch. Beautiful, rainy spring day, but we're glad you're all here. Thank you so much. So we have 5 birthday cards, I think, going around today. We always have cards for people. And I just want to say, as I looked at these cards, these 5 cards are very, very special people to the Jackson County Historical Society. Everybody is, but these people have been members for a very long time, and they are still some of our very strongest volunteers that do so very much for us. So, you know, put a little extra love in that signature, or put a note or something. So they're Kevin and Karen Brown, who are twins, but you'd never know that by looking at them. Bill Jan, Thelma Nissen. Oh. Well, we have to sing happy birthday to Thelma Nissen. Can you do that?
She here?
Yeah, she's always here. Okay, sorry, Ann, my bad. Sorry. And so I'll finish my announcements, and by then Ann will be ready. And Marcella Henneke, who doesn't come too often, but boy does she work hard in the background. So we love all these people and thank them so very much. Okay, I've been asking for the last couple weeks that you remember that tomorrow, May 15th, is Great Give Day, and that you remember our Humble Little nonprofit on that day. And then I noticed that 2 lists came out in the newspaper. There were 2 things in the newspaper of nonprofits participating in the Greater Dubuque Community Foundation Great Give Day, and our name was not on either one of them. So I want you to know this was not fake news. I was not telling, it's not a scam. We really are involved in that. And for whatever reason, probably my fault, whatever reason, we're on the Dubuque list instead of the Maquoketa list, so it did not get in our paper. But please, you know, if you can, it's a 24-hour online donation, and it would be wonderful if you could help us out. Wonderful because whatever you give ends up being multiplied many times along the way. The Community Foundation of Dubuque gives us extra then, and then we're able to put that money when we do Birdies for Charity, and then we get, so we grow that money before it even happens. So if you can remember us tomorrow, that would be wonderful. Okay, but I apologize that we weren't on that list because we should have been. Maybe we're going to need a little help on Friday the 17th if this is up your alley and anyone is so inclined. Friday we're having a program for homeschoolers that want to learn about the orphan train. So I said, okay, we can do this. We're the Center for Iowa Orphan Train Research, and I expected about 20 kids. I found out yesterday we're having 66. And we even have, because homeschoolers come as a group with, you know, with parents or whoever, they come as groups. And we even have some grandparents coming and some people who have relatives that did ride the orphan train. So it's going to be a neat thing, but I think we're going to need a little extra help. If anybody is available on Friday, that would be neat. May 30th is the Preston's. Is it called Preston Days? I'm not sure what it's called. The Preston Parade.
Preston Fireman Celebration.
Thank you. And they have a parade, correct? And is it at 6 o'clock, I'm guessing?
Friday night.
At 6 o'clock Friday night.
At St. Joe's Catholic Church parking lot.
Okay, thank you so much. So we hope to have a float in that parade for our muster on the Maquoketa, our Civil War reenactment that's coming up. So if you'd like to help with that, we would appreciate that too. And then the biggest announcement of all, before I turn the time over to our speaker today, we have a first and a phenomenal Brown Bag Lunch coming up on next Tuesday, the 21st, I believe. I'm so excited. Roger Stewart is going to do a Brown Bag Lunch for us. And it's going to be fantastic. He's brought in a few of his pictures for us to look at, and he's going to be talking about his growing up on a farm. And
if you say it's fantastic, it's overstated, you overstate it.
I did not. And he said that he's got lots and lots of things, great pictures, And he said he was gonna it was gonna kind of be a roast of himself, right? He's gonna make fun of himself, is what he said. Anyway, we're really looking forward to that, and I thank Roger for that. And remind everybody that there's a lot of Tuesdays left in the year, and everybody has a brown bag lunch in them somewhere, okay? So I'd like to turn the time over now to Ray Scott, one of our favorite people. He's doing our program today. I love when Ray comes because he always brings his relatives.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. And thank you. We get to see lots of people when Ray comes. I forgot, happy birthday. So happy birthday to Thelma Nissen. She's back here in the corner.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Thelma. Happy birthday to you. Hey, Thelma.
And we especially appreciate Thelma because she's here bright and early on every Tuesday, and she sees that everything is set up down here, and she does so very, very much for us. So we appreciate Thelma. And now, Ray Scott, we're going to be talking about Reverend Boomershine, among other things.
Among other things, yeah.
All right. I still forgot something.
Is that gonna work? Be loud enough? Okay. So I start the program here with the church that was built by Reverend. How about there?
Right to you.
Let me see if I can do that. I used to play with these.
There we go.
Thank you, Dan.
So this church is still standing in Makokata, and Reverend Boomershine was the man that accomplished getting it built. So I like to start with the saying that he laid the church's first cornerstone, which was the church's foundation, when he was here in 1900. And this is the young man, Reverend D.F. Boomershine. And the only way I knew how to start this program is to tell you the relationship that I had with Reverend Boomershine through my grandparents. This is my grandfather, Henry Scott, and when he passed away in Davenport, we had the job of cleaning out his apartment building. And when we did, this wedding certificate showed up in his belongings. And my dad took it into our possession because it meant something special to him. Because it was from Reverend Boomershine. And it says, basically, I won't read the whole thing, but on January 24th, 1917, Josephine Schmidt married Henry Scott at the parsonage in Makokata. And the parsonage is no longer here, but understand that it stood on the grounds of where the elementary school is today on Jetson Street.
Middle school.
Middle school. Okay. So here's another announcement that I found in the paper. As you can see, this is their wedding picture taken at Condell Studios here in Makokata. And again, that's Henry Scott and Josephine Schmidt. And they were accompanied by Josie's sister Elizabeth and Henry's brother Lester, I believe. My grandmother had 3 sisters in her family, and she is the tallest one on the far left. That's Josie, and the 2 sisters are Elizabeth and Kate. And the little girl here is my grandmother. And when that picture was taken, Elizabeth was not born yet. But after they were married in January, this is a picture I had found in pictures that were given to me by Pat Gotti. This is actually a postcard, and the center of attraction is my grandpa and grandmother are standing around the Schmidt siblings and the Scott siblings on Easter. And being married in January, and this picture taken in April, Josie was already pregnant when this picture was taken, so my dad's oldest sister, Ruth, is present in this picture, but you can't see her. The interesting thing on this is the older women in the middle are my two great-grandmothers, and I never had any pictures of those two together until this picture came out in this box of treasures that Pat Gotti had shared with me. So of course when they got married and life goes on, this is the family of Henry and Josie. And there were 8 children in this picture, and Josie is pregnant for the 9th time with the. And they were a happy family. They lived southwest of here, 1 mile east of Lost Nation when this picture was taken. My father is on Henry's lap. Josie is holding the youngest girl at that time was Polly. And the rest of the family fit in. Well, what happened when this little baby on the left was born, her name is Bonnie Jo. My grandmother died. So we found this picture would be taken on the day of her funeral in Lost Nation. And lucky for my grandfather in 1933 realized that he couldn't take care of a baby. So he adopted her out to his younger brother, Ernie and Beulah Shocker Scott, and they took her in and raised Bonnie Jo for their own. Bonnie Jo's son is here today with us, Aaron Marks. So this little girl grew up, of course, and the first thing she did was she learned how to dance. She learned how to tap dance. She won the dancing contest at the Buckhorn Creamery at the picnic with over 2,000 people present in 1936. And I found the date of this picture because of a book you have written by Velma Teeple. And she dates that picture to be June 21st, 1936. So it's just, if you just keep reading, you can kind of put all the pieces together. Years went on, Bonnie Jo began to realize that she had a whole family of siblings. And in her later 20s or 25, she got reunited with what originally were her cousins, but she now knows they were her brothers and sisters. My grandpa, as he raised his kids, was always proud of the children. And this picture was taken in the World War II time. And my dad's brother, Kenneth, is in the army suit. And his sister, Ruth, is in the other one. And Ruth was the oldest in the family, so she was the baby in the other picture. And they served in the military. But 6 of those served in the military sometime in their life. Dad and Grandpa were pretty proud of that. So in 1967, we had a family reunion in Lost Nation. It really wasn't a family reunion. It was a social gathering of friends and family for my grandfather standing in the back. And so I'm just showing some pictures of everybody who came. We had about 200 guests there in the Legion building in Lost Nation. And that would be my dad and his siblings. And the picture on the right, of course, is myself and Aaron, as we grew up as cousins. And I threw these two pictures in again, the crowd that was there, and we took pictures of everybody that attended. Bonnie Joe is there in the back. And so it was quite a gathering. This picture was taken the day of my grandfather's funeral in Lost Nation. It's beside the front of the Presbyterian Church. I remember it being taken. So starting at the left, we have Ruth, Kenneth, Edith, Alice, Vera, Helen, Henry, my dad, Holly, and Bonnie Joe. Kenneth passed away in 1973. But the girls and my dad continued to like to get together, and this wonderful picture was taken. So now we move back a generation, because this is Silas and Amelia Scott, my grandpa's parents. Four of the siblings in this picture were all married by D.F. Boomershine here in Macokota. The second one to get married was his brother Anson. He married Letty Rutenbeck from Lost Nation. Letty Rutenbeck's father was Fred Rutenbeck, the carpenter that built so many homes in Lost Nation, including the Gardner House, which is still standing beside the Lutheran Church in Lost Nation. The next girl to get married was Mabel. Mabel married Walter Horseman. Well, Reverend Boomershine was on double duty that day because he had two weddings to perform. And the first one was Mabel Scott and Walter Horseman. And then the second one was Lillian Horseman marrying Louis Wolfe from Lost Nation. And here today with us is two of the granddaughters, Pat Gotti and her cousin, Bonnie. Brandon. And then the next sibling to get married was Holly. Holly Scott married Edwin Moore. And Ira Scott was the best man, and Mabel Scott stood behind Holly. Again, that being their grandmother. And Ed and Holly had two sons, would be my dad's cousins. And the one in the back is Archer, and the one in front is Grant, and I got to know both of them. Grant more than Archer. Archer lived in Dallas, Pennsylvania. He only died 3 years ago. He was 99. Well, here at that same reunion in Lost Nation is myself, sitting on Ed Moore's lap. And he became my special uncle because he was a minister. Couldn't get away with anything with him. Reverend Moore's church that he attended up until the time that he was married was the Smithtown Church north of Lost Nation. And he had such a good upbringing in the church that he went on to Bible school in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, seminary, and it was called the Mission House. The Mission House was started for the German Reformed Church in Wisconsin that gave the ministers for the church in eastern Iowa. After Reverend Boomershine came from Tiffin, Ohio. That church building called the Mission House is still standing in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, or Plymouth, Wisconsin, and is now known as Lakeland College, Lakeland University. No longer a seminary, but the building is still used to educate people. Reverend Moore, when he first got married, decided he wanted to farm like his father and his father-in-law, Silas Scott. And he farmed north of Lost Nation on the Moore farm. But somewhere 1927, he decided that his life was going to be in the ministry. So Reverend Moore became associated with his church in a strong way, and he became a minister of the church in Zwingle. Help me out with the name.
Harmony.
The Harmony Church in Zwingle. And lo and behold, Reverend Boomershine ordained him. And that was the relationship of the family again with Reverend Boomershine. Reverend Moore stayed at Harmony for 4 years. My understanding is there was a rough within the church, and he decided not to fight them or get along with them, that Reverend Boomershine helped him resign, so he went elsewhere. He actually went to Orangeville, Illinois. I know where that is because I used to do my work there when I was an artificial inseminator. I was in Orangeville many, many times. I did not know until Ruth Wilson here had a letter to her grandparents dealing with a member of her family he did a service for, and it was postmarked in Orangeville, Illinois. This is a picture we'll come back to later in the presentation, but I wanted to show it at this time because this was taken on the day of his ordination. And if you can see, the number 4 on the jacket is Ed Moore. His wife Holly, number 1 and 2 are the 2 children. Again, we'll come back to this in a minute. But I'm going to break my presentation right now for another story that you might enjoy. And it says that Doc Osler, the scientist who advocates chloroforming people when they reach 70, is a finicky old crab. It is evidenced by the recent feat of Joe Stender and Henry Bush of near Nashville, and who are both past the 70 milestone. These 2 veterans of the old school, unassisted, cut and put in the barn 100 tons of hay up until last Saturday night, and say they are feeling fine as a fiddle. If any of the young cubs want a few pointers, they will be accommodated, providing Joe and Henry have the time. Henry is Alice, Ruth,
Our great-grandfather.
and Margaret's great-grandfather. So I threw a picture in of their family. This young man in the back is their grandfather, William Bush. And there's a picture of them as well when Henry and Anna Bush, and is that correct? In Macokota, celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. And their grandfather is sitting right here. And the connection to this, again, is their uncle, Arnold Bush, is the person I bought my cows from when I began milking cows 41 years ago. So now we're going to move forward to D.F. Boomershine. And his name is actually Daniel Franklin Boomershine. But the gentleman on the far left is also a Boomershine, but not him. That's his younger brother. His name was John Edmund Boomershine. He was from 1910 until 1911, this Reverend Boomershine was the preacher at the Harmony Church. And when he left, I think it was 3 years, he went to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And as you can see by this death notice, that he died in 1919. Can anybody relate to what he died from? Spanish flu. And I found the story, I didn't put it in the program, but his brother, Daniel from Makokata, went to Milwaukee and took his brother back to Ohio to be buried. So there's not one Boomershine, there were two that started here in Jackson County. So here's an older picture of Reverend Boomershine. And like it says, its first preaching services were held in the new church October 7th of 1900. He made it so there was no debt against the building when he started. And so the cornerstone of that church was the foundation of the church that he built, spiritually and physically. Reverend Boomershine served several locations. He first started out in Union Cemetery, south of town, had a church. It was called the Union Church. He also served a church in Lost Nation, which is now the Presbyterian Church. He built this fine building we looked at earlier in Makokata. And he did services in Smithtown as well. I haven't found any marriages there. Most of his marriages took place at the parsonage in Makokata. So his claim to fame was he buried a lot of people in Smithtown. Yeah.
What did you say, Union Church? What other name did you put with Union? Had it?
At the Union Cemetery.
Union Cemetery is south of town.
Yeah.
There used to be a building there.
A church, right?
Church.
And what did you call it? Haddock? I thought you said.
Oh,
I thought you said.
I'm
haddock.
stuttering. Sorry.
This Union Church, huh?
Union Church.
I wondered.
With the cemetery.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I
And
said.
the other church is Buckhorn?
Yeah, the one in the lower corner is the
Yeah.
Buckhorn Church.
Yeah.
Building is still there. It's a community center if somebody wants to use it in for repair. But that was his 3 churches. He had quite a following. I just want to read this. The day the church in Makokata was founded, the church building was dedicated to the triune God by the pastor, Reverend D.F. Boomershine, on Sunday, November 11th, 1900, free of debt. His classmate from college, Reverend Boyer, did the service that day, and all the services were inspiring and well attended, and that was pretty much the story when I read the papers of his services that he did in Lost Nation. It was a packed house. I'm sure every place he did, there was standing room only. So now we move on to some of the folks that were married by Mr. Boomershine. I'm going to start here with Myrtle Ruggeberg and Harry Sheepers. This is Alice's grandparents. Alice was so nice that she still has the wedding certificate that Reverend Boomershine signed. Much like a different certificate, but similar to the one that my grandparents had. So here I put them up on the screen. 2 certificates. Help me out, who?
My name's Earlene Stimmel, and it's my mother and dad. And that was over 100 years ago.
Yep. February 10th, 1924.
Signed by Boomershine? Signed by Boomershine?
Signed by Boomershine. And his wife, Jessie, too. So Alice also found the actual written certificate, as you can see, and there is the name, D.F. Boomershine. He never went by his name. It was always D.F. Another couple that got married, which I don't have much information on, is a Laura Bush and an Elmer Ruggenberg.
That was my grandmother's brother.
Grandmother's brother. Now we got, how'd that get in there? That's none other than Bonnie, right? Well, I had to go through the church records to find her grandparents. And so when you do a search of the actual records, that's kind of what it looks like. They're in two long rows and you read it real close. And I got them to come out here. So that's Ed Gibson of Macokota married Edith Lang from Morrison, Illinois. Reverend Boomershine married Bonnie's grandparents. So just this morning she shared with me she had the photos of their 60th wedding anniversary. There's their wedding photo. Another couple from Lost Nation was married. That was Herman McCandy and Florence Mills. We know Florence Mills by Florence McCandy. She wrote many books in Lost Nation, and you sell them in the library or the Historical Society here. And she wrote a story of her and her sister called Little Girls in Blue, and it's a real treasure. They put parts of it in the Lost Nation Scoop yet today to tell the story of when those two girls were little.
You know, it's so sad because when you read everything that you read that was in the newspaper, we never ever put the year.
Then in the story, I had to clip out to make it presentable what year the papers were printed. I could, anybody wants to know, look these all up, be not a problem.
Yeah.
But Florence McCandy was a special friend of Holly Scott Moore. And I have letters written by Florence to my Aunt Holly of how to do research on family history. Holly didn't have the use of the computers in the 1950s until she died. But I found the letter, and that's why I'm here today. So there's a picture of Florence with her books and bags, because everywhere she went, she did family histories for many, many people in the area. This picture was just taken last week. The lady in the middle is Florence's daughter. She's 96. And she happened to marry Tom Scott, another Scott relative from Baldwin. Another couple in Lost Nation that got married was my grandpa's cousin, Art Gardner, married another Rutenbeck. He farmed for a while, but in 1905 he bought the hat shop in Lost Nation, and he sold women's clothing and whatever goes with them. Another couple I found here was my grandpa's first cousin, John Scott. John married another Schmidt, my grandma's cousin. And they became a couple, and they had two sons, Leroy and Darlene, from Macokota here. And Jack, we called him Jackie Lee, but it was Jack Scott who founded Scott Drug in DeWitt, Iowa. That's his parents. Boomershine was active in that family as well. two, I don't have any pictures, but this was two more weddings. Esther Cressy is actually their mother's first cousin. And Esther Cressy married a gentleman from Puerto Rico. So Boomershine's legacy traveled the world. The other one is Lois Gardner, again of the Gardner House in Lost Nation. She married Leslie Schrader, and married by Mr. Boomershine in 19, doesn't say the year. But anyway, the connection to that is that they moved to Walcott. She was a registered nurse and he was the doctor in Walcott, and he practiced in St. Luke's Hospital. He delivered my brother. But here's the true story of Reverend Boomershine. This article we found last week upstairs in the history files, that in the Des Moines Register had this article. Here is the real marrying parson. He's made 1,314 people oh so happy. So that meant he did 657 weddings up until the year 1928, I believe this article is from. I'm going to actually read this whole thing. The Reverend D.F. Boomershine, who has been a pastor of the Reformed Church here for 28 years, during his pastorate has pronounced the words that have made 657 men the happiest person on earth. Not quite all of them have remained in that state of bliss. That can hardly be expected in this age. But the percentage of knots that came untied is so low as to be almost negligible. The blushing brides have ranged in age from 15 to 66, and the stalwart grooms from 17 to 70. One significant feature must be mentioned. The number of women taking the second partner far exceeds the number of men who have aided in their second matrimonial venture. The reverend gentleman was careful to advance no theory in the explanation of this fact. 4 young people have sought his kindly administration, whose parents he had also joined in wedlock. One woman has twice appeared before him as a bride, and once he has spoken words of consolation as he committed her husband to the grave. A unique experience in this strictly Caucasian county was the appearance of at the parsonage of a colored couple from a nearby city. They had chosen Maquoketa as their honeymoon city because of its unusual name. And when upon their query in the clerk's office as to the names of the resident ministers of the gospel, they were given the name of the subject of the sketch. They were so delighted. It was the funniest name of all, and they sought his home at once. Another unusual request was that of a groom whose brother had arrived too late to witness the ceremony. He asked how much the minister would charge to repeat the service, and being assured there would be no extra fee, asked to have it done over again. A wedding fee once had to be returned. It was not because the bride proved unsatisfactory, but the fee had been paid in advance and sudden illness prevented the ceremony. More to the minister's liking was the groom who came 2 days after the wedding ceremony and added 50 cents to the fee already given. A strange coincidence was noted at the close of the year. Ceremonies performed and the number of funerals conducted tallied off. 403 of each in 20 years pastorate. In the register of January 22nd, Reverend R.L. Van Nice claimed the record as a marrying parson, 575 ceremonies. Record nothing. The Maquoketa candidate beats him by nearly 100 couples. Then I found this interesting tidbit, and this comes out of your 1989 History of Jackson County. And this is O.J. and Zelma Bowman. Interesting fact is I knew them. They were our landlords in Lost Nation, south of Maquoketa. Their farm was purchased from their grandfather in the 1940s. And I really enjoyed having the chance to talk to O.J. when he'd come out. But Zelma, you were not to be spoken to. If you were heard, she would let you know about it. But their interesting story was that each of their parents were married by D.F. Boomershine, and they followed suit and got married by him as well. I didn't know that. Time we were there. But I want to read this down here about Zelma. Zelma is a homemaker and helped with the farming. Zelma could drive a tractor, help unload corn, or whatever needed to be done. In the earlier days, she led the horse in the hay fork, milked cows by hand, and even picked corn by hand. The milk from the cows was run through a separator. The cream was put in 10-gallon cans and hauled to the Buckhorn Creamery about 2 miles away. So Velma Teeple knew her quite well. We rented the farm south of Maquoketa. O.J. still ran a farm in Maquoketa. It's now where the YMCA is located, just 2 blocks down the street. I remember going to see him multiple times. We'd make trips to Maquoketa. Dad would go see if anything we could do to help him farm the Goodenow farm. Well, now we turn the attention from marriages to burials. And this lady here is my and our great-great-grandmother. In 1908, Reverend Boomershine had the pleasure of being the man that serviced Jane McCarter Edmonds in the Lost Nation Cemetery. And another elderly lady, 90 years old, was Mrs. Gardner. And Jane Edmonds' daughter married Levanchi Gardner's son. So he married or buried both of those in Lost Nation. The Gardner chapter of the Eastern Star is named after her. Then I found these 2 clippings with help of Ruth and Margaret. These 2, Mrs. Siebel, that's spelled wrong, it's supposed to be Sieben. Mrs. Sieben and Mrs. Pict were sisters. They both had the attendance of their funerals by Mr. Boomershine. And they're both buried in the Smithtown Cemetery. Now we have these 2 brothers. John F. Schmidt on the left side is my great-grandfather. This is Josie's dad. The man on the right is the younger brother, Gustav. Both of their funerals took place in Bleedorn Church. Even though it's a Lutheran church, Boomershine attended their funerals. They both died of stomach cancer. They both died young and are buried in the Pine Hill Cemetery 2 miles north of the Bleedorn Church. That picture that I had at the beginning of the show where Josie was pregnant with her first offspring, that was John F. Schmidt's farm. That is still the farm where my brother lives today. So again, we have the picture, and this is August Henry Schmidt's obituary. And he had three wives. His first wife died after 2 children. Then the children died, he lost them all. Then he marries his first wife's sister, and she had 3 children. And two being sons would be Ferd and George Schmidt. And And Ferdinand George Schmidt down in Elwood had the winning carcass shows for Angus beef cattle in the late 40s and 50s. That's his claim to fame. Then we come to my great-grandfather Silas. Silas died in 1928, and again, Reverend Boomershine did the services. Coming back to Lost Nation, we find a man buried there, probably both of them, husband and wife. Bob Cressy was married to Bertha Ruggeberg. When she passed away, Robert Cressy married and became
Married Frida.
married Frida
Sieben.
Frida Sieben, which is Ruth and all of their
Great
great aunt. Well, Mr. Cressy owned the lumberyard in Lost Nation up until the time that he died. And that was a huge building in Lost Nation, a thriving business at one time.
Did Bertha die in childbirth or shortly after? Anyway, they had one son together, Daryl Cressy, and he ran the lumberyard for a while after his dad died. Yeah. And then, they had four girls.
So the next two burials here we have is Mrs. Shocker. I haven't made the relationship, but that would be Ernie Scott married Beulah Shocker, who raised Bonnie Joe, the little girl. This would be a relative of theirs. And then on the other side we have Naomi Pitton. And she is the daughter of Marshall Cook. Marshall Cook. The family must have made quite a few changes because Marshall Cook is buried in the Baldwin Catholic Cemetery. And yet Reverend Boomershine was her officiating pastor. The interesting side note is Marshall Cook is also Irvin Penningroth's second great-grandfather. And then when Marshall Cook first came to America in 1840, he was a strong German, and he went to Iowa City and purchased a 40-acre farm. He later ended up selling it through a couple generations, and that became the Burichter Farm, where I grew up. Another funeral he did was for Sophie Burichter Moore. And that was Uncle Ed Moore's aunt and uncle. But Boomershine assisted Reverend Moore in that service because this happened at the time that my uncle, great uncle, was just starting in the pastorate. So he had Reverend Boomershine's help to conduct those services. And then we come, as everyone has an end, Reverend Boomershine had some problems. He went to Rochester, Minnesota to the Mayo Clinic and had an operation which ultimately caused his demise. And just want to read one part of this. The funeral service for D.F. Boomershine, who died at his home at 11 o'clock, will be held at the Buchner Chapel and at 2 o'clock at the Methodist Church. He has his own church, but it wasn't big enough. So they held his funeral services at the Methodist Church, and my great uncle, Reverend Moore, conducted Boomershine's services. And 6 local ministers were the pallbearers yesterday at the funeral service for D.F. Boomershine, for 28 years the pastor of the Reformed Church. The pallbearers were Reverends G.F. Barsalou, Congregational Church, H.H. Dill, the Methodist Church, Guy Pickering, the Free Methodist Church, D.E. Killeran, the Baptist Church, and George Talbert, retired Baptist minister, and the E.E. Senst of the Lutheran congregation. the Reverend Moore conducted the service from Orangeville, Illinois. Led into the ministry through Mr. Boomershine's effort, ordained by him, married by him, 2 children baptized him, and assisted in the decedent in solving problems of his first charge at school, spoke intimately of the life work of Mr. Boomershine. He was a member of the Sir Knights, the Knight Templars, Casket Bearers, and again, there's a mention of George Schmidt, which would be the son of Gustav Schmidt. And what I learned about George was that George could play the violin, and at weddings sometimes George would be in attendance to play the violin for these newlywed couples. And so now we come back to the picture that was at the Harmony Church when my great uncle was ordained. And when Ed and Holly Moore died, their belongings became into my mom's possession. The 2 boys had lived very far away, did not want to travel with all those possessions, so they sorted out what they wanted to keep and gave everything else to my mother. And this happens to be a partial picture, which I'll get to, but Reverend Boomershine is right there with his wife Jessie, with Uncle Ed, my Aunt Holly, and my dad's 2 cousins. And I had that picture probably in our possession for 50 years and didn't have a clue what it meant. Figured it out for this meeting today. Pretty interesting. That's hard to read. I got a copy of that. Reverend, the interesting thing here in Maquoketa is that he went by D.F. Boomershine. Every publication I find in the church or in the newspaper, they called him David. His name wasn't David. His name was Daniel. So, Daniel F. Boomershine was born January 14, 1866 in Montgomery County, Ohio. He went to Heidelberg University and taught there for 2 years. In 1894, he came to Maquoketa to build a congregation of Reformed Church here in the city. That he already had the pastorship of 2 churches established in the country. So faithfully, that his labors were blessing of God was shown when on May 20th, the cornerstone was laid for that beautiful, served so long as pastor. So that was the church in Maquoketa here. So faithfully did he labor, and so sincerely did he serve his people, that he remained here during his entire life as a minister, the only pastorate he has ever held, and the only pastor the church has ever had. His wife was named Jessie Gregg, and Miss Ethel Winterstein has lived with the Boomershine home since childhood, has given a daughter's care to the decedent during his illness. Miss Winterstein was a school teacher in Lost Nation, and after Boomershine had got ill, she moved to Maquoketa just to take care of Mr. Boomershine.
When did it say he died? What year did it say?
1932. And his wife Jessie is here. She died 2 years later in 1934. She died in Independence, Iowa, at the mental hospital she was in for mental illness. So now we come back to the big, that's the full picture in front of the Harmony Church. when Reverend Moore received his ordination. And it took me a while. With Ruth's help, we figured out who some of the people are. If we go to the very top row, the little guy with the beard up there, that's their great-grandfather, Henry Bush, that we mentioned earlier, knew how to make hay. His sister, Henry Bush's sister, is the lady right down front. That's Sophie Bush Moore. She married Peter Moore as her second spouse when Mr. Bush died. Peter Moore is the father of William Moore, and William is the father of Ed Moore, who married my grandpa's sister. I assume these two are ministers of the faith that helped get the ordination done, and the rest we have to find other pictures to know exactly who they might be, but I'm sure they're mostly friends, and, of course, friends and family. And there you see the headstone that lays in Mount Hope Cemetery today. I don't believe anybody carved her death year. There's no family. They have no children. Their closest relatives and descendants would be nieces and nephews in the state of Ohio. And so for quite a few years, there have been no flowers placed on the grave of Reverend Boomershine. This coming Memorial Day, I hope we have a ton of them there for him. Again, to go back to that's my grandfather. This is his two sisters, Mabel and Holly. And those are the ones that were married by Reverend Boomershine. So there's a picture of Holly and Ed Moore on their 50th wedding anniversary. Again, me sitting on Reverend Moore's lap. And the last slide here I have to show is I really got to know Reverend Moore when I was in junior high after this had taken place, because he was responsible with other family members to restore what is known today as the Washington Cemetery north of Lost Nation by the Smithtown Church. He had taken upon himself to find the graves, find where the cattle and hogs had ruined the fence, got into the grave, broke the stones, made a mess of it, and he took it upon himself because his uncle is buried there and other family members. The large stone you see here is for Gottlieb and Juliana Daniel.
Yeah.
That is collectively their great-great-grandparents. So Ed Moore found a treasure.
Is that in the middle of something?
Church is having their 150th anniversary on Memorial Day this year. My sister-in-law is part of the committee that has done this, and she was showing me pictures this past week of that. Everything inside is original. They have just replicated the siding and the shutters. She said over the years they now have spent over $250,000 restoring that church.
So is Ellen Mayberry your sister-in-law? Yeah. I'm Ruth Wilson. I'm the one that works with Ellen. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So everybody's welcome to come. Yeah.
Want to know the day?
May 26th.